I know all the folks round these arts and parts. Can't say I know you. Leastways, not yet. But I dare say I know what you'll be wanting. Some of the crack, maybe. A wee yarn with your sup, is it? No harm in that. Come on over. Warm yourself, I'll warn you, though. If it's the old Begor and Blarney shenanigans you're after, you'll not hear them from me. Well, if such like pleases you, you sit on. I'll fill your ears. And see what story is meant for you on this dark cold night.
So how are you this evening, Spence? You're going to have to forgive me tonight, Spence. I've got the dog running about the house, so if you hear any barking or sniffing or shaking, it'll be the dog, not me.
I'm good, Chris. There was almost one less Shih Tzu crossed with a Shoodle dog in the world this week. My new dog that you know all about me, Rocket.
He is a rocket.
He ate my reading glasses. I have been fumbling around like Mr. Magoo for the better part of this week, mate. I mean, other than that, yeah, we've had quite a few seasons this week.
Oh, we have, yeah.
I think we saw our first drop of snow.
Have you got the snow up around you?
We touch of it today, mate. Yeah, we touch.
We're too wet down here.
These city slickers, you see.
City slickers. I was just looking through the news there, just to delve a little bit into true crime, which I know was a passion for us both as well. They reopened the case of the missing German hitchhiker from 22 years ago.
Oh, goodness, yes. Inga Maria Hauser, yeah?
Yeah. They normally reopen cases when they have something to reopen, don't they?
Very true. And like that's a fairly infamous and emotive case here in Northern Ireland. But Inga was a free spirit, a German backpacker who travelled to Northern Ireland back in 1988. And she basically disappeared after getting off the Larne ferry on the coast. She travelled over from Scotland, disappeared, and was found 2 weeks later. She was only 18 years old in a remote part of Ballypatrick Forest out in Ballycastle, County Antrim. And as you say, Chris, like, no one's been convicted of her killing, so that suggests something's stirring out there.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting when these things come back up. I think when the things back through DNA, like the Golden State Killer and people like that, who have been taken more from familiar DNA, family DNA, than their own personal DNA. But it's definitely an interesting case, always worth having an eye on, and maybe if something does come up, we'll mention it again further down the line if something happens.
Absolutely, that's one to keep an eye on.
But tonight, right back to the big man himself. He's so big he has his own day. So everyone out there, grab your green pints and put your leprechaun hat on, because tonight we're going to do St. Patrick. So, let's start off with the basics. St. Patrick was a patron saint of Ireland and was born in Britain around 385 AD to a wealthy Romanised family. I assume that means he was a Roman then, Spence?
Yes, as with all these figures, what we know of them and what is actually written down and provable is very different, you know. But yeah, Romanised family living in Britain. He doesn't give an awful lot away. He gives a wee bit of detail in his own confession. He states he was the son of a deacon and a grandson of a priest, and he was from Benavente Bernea, I hope I've got that right, which is a town in the west of Britain, what we would commonly refer to as present-day Wales.
So what you're telling me is, Spence, St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, and all those who like drinking the black stuff, is really a Welshman.
It looks that way. History would tell us he is indeed a Welshman.
Oh, well, I mean, what can you say? I do. There are some nice Welshmen.
Not when we're playing them at rugby.
So, how did he get to Ireland then?
Well, his life took a bit of a harrowing turn at the age of 16. So Patrick was believed he was captured by Irish raiders, taken to Ireland as a slave, and he recounted that traumatic experience in his own words.
I was taken into captivity in Ireland, along with thousands of others. We deserved this. We had gone away from God and did not keep his commandments. Patrick then spent 6 years in captivity, working as a shepherd on Slemish Mountain.
That's right, Chris. Slemish Mountain, and just as a matter of quirky interest, Slemish Mountain, and that's what we locals call it. I don't know if it's actually a mountain, but Slemish is actually just a few miles from where I'm sitting right now speaking to you. It's not too far from where I live as the crow flies. And he was enslaved there. So it sits in the townland of Carnstrone, Brashean in Northern Ireland. And it's a very special place. I'm sure you've seen it.
I definitely have, and I think that it reminds me of Devil's Tower in Close Encounters, because it just sits on its own in the middle of the land. So for a 360, you can see it from plenty of directions.
That's very true, man. And it doesn't really matter how you regard it. If it's the impressive remnants of a long extinct volcano, or if you're looking at it as one of those keystones from Irish Christian history, which all these pilgrims still visit to this very day on St. Patrick's Day, it is without doubt a dramatic, sparring sight to look upon. As you say, just like Close Encounters.
And do they still go up barefoot once a year?
They do, Chris, and that's about 437 metres, the plane to the top, 1.5 kilometre round walk to get to the summit. That's got slippery terrain as well.
There's a lot of them. There's hundreds of them that go up and do that barefoot every year. It's not my cup of tea right enough, but fair play to them. It's usually raining.
To my shame, even though I'm a local, it's been a long time. So I suppose I should make a solemn vow now to all the listeners of Irish Gothic that I will traverse Slemish at some point in the near future. Chris, you can have the air ambulance on standby for me.
Patrick was enslaved by a local farmer, and he was basically put onto Slemish as a shepherd. And anyone who's seen Slemish, and we'll put pictures up on the social media, it is, and especially back then, a very desolate place that it would have complete solitude. That's where we think Patrick grew closer to nature and in turn closer to God.
That's right. And eventually Patrick, he later did escape Slemish. I think at the age of 22, he returned to Britain. But then he felt the calling to come back to Ireland as a missionary. And he arrived back in Ireland around 432 AD and began to preach Christianity to the pagan Irish people. Well,
I read a few things, but one of the main things I read was he was a bit of a scourge to the pagans. He did not like pagans at all, obviously, and he wasn't behind the door in driving them out of places. A bit like a witch-finder general.
Yep, he definitely faced a lot of opposition from the pagan druids and hardships and persecution. His faith dedication led to the establishment of monasteries and churches throughout the country and the widespread acceptance of Christianity in Ireland, but definitely a character you can look at from two sides. I think we talk about that a little bit later when we were going to look at some of the mythology, some of the legends that St. Patrick is linked to. I suppose the next link in the chain then would be his death. Chris, is that shrouded in mystery?
St. Patrick died on, can you guess the date? Not the whole date, just the day of the year.
That's got to be March 17th then, has it?
Of course it is. It's March 17th, though I'm sure there was Gregorian and Roman calendars that moved that around. But certainly March 17th, 461. Now we'll come back later to where he is supposedly buried. But I think we'll go and look at some of the yarned legends and miracles associated with the big guy.
St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland, subject of many legends and miracles. In fact, he's known as the man of 1,000 miracles. So no shortage of material, Chris. It's just whittling it down a bit into a short podcast.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've got one about an exorcism in a pub, but I think what we should look at first is some of the most famous ones. And certainly amongst the top is the shamrock. Patrick is said to have used the 3 leaves of the shamrock to explain the Holy Trinity to a non-believer. The shamrock is Ireland's national flower, of course, and traditionally worn on St. Patrick's Day. The simple yet powerful image resonated with the Irish people and became a symbol of Christianity in Ireland. Have you ever worn a shamrock on St. Patrick's Day, Spence?
I believe I have, Chris. I've definitely had a shamrock on maybe an Ireland shirt or something when we were playing the rugby.
Oh, most definitely.
I haven't went full shillelagh, I have to say.
Oh, you haven't went? Maybe there's time for it. Maybe we'll get a picture of you this year, full shillelagh, and put it up on the socials.
The top of Slemish.
The story that everybody knows, that everybody's heard, is St. Patrick got rid of all the snakes in Ireland. What's that all about?
It always conjures up images of Gandalf, standing and driving out orcs and what have you.
Thou shalt not slither.
So the story goes that Patrick drove all the snakes from Ireland into the sea and drowned them. Now, we know that the Scullies in the room would contend differently. They would say Ireland has no native snakes because as an island, it's too cold for reptiles during the last ice age, and there was no land bridge to connect Ireland to Britain. So there couldn't be any snakes, but, it's certainly still too cold, and there certainly are no snakes.
Well, it's fucking freezing, I can tell you that.
It's funny enough, Patrick doesn't mention shamrocks or driving the snakes from Ireland in his confessions. All these traditions have grown up around the story and came much later. But, you can't hide the fact there are no snakes.
Well, that's true. I haven't seen it. I've never seen a snake. So, all I can imagine is it must be true, But most definitely, he seemed to have a thing with snakes, St. Patrick. There is a story of him at the River Shannon. He was approaching some stepping stones at a small ford when he was faced with a serpent whose body was twice as thick as a large oak tree, blacker than the hounds of hell, and had 2 large eyes as red as blood. When the large serpent moved, the swell of water would disturb the entire river, leaving the water muddy for miles. Using only his hook staff, there's the old Gandalf coming out there, using only his hook staff, he says, "Thou shalt not pass." No, he didn't. No, he didn't say, "Thou shalt not pass." He says, he caught the serpent and chained it to where the River Shannon meets at 3 points. There it would languish until Judgment Day.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Another story of St. Patrick, again associated with serpents, was when he came to the aid of farmers in the Galtee Mountains. So they believed that they were cursed and their cattle and their sheep were dying because there was evidence of a snake bite on their livestock. So this time St. Patrick, armed once again with his trusty crooked staff, and this time with the addition of a bucket, Chris.
As you do.
Set off into the mountains, and here he found the killer snake, and he used the hook of his staff to lift it and place it inside the bucket. Patrick then cast the snake into the depths of the Loch Muskerry, that's County Tipperary, commanding it to stay in the lake for 7 years. From that day forth, the livestock and the land flourished. The curse was lifted.
He definitely had a thing for snakes.
These encounters, along with others, are representative of Christianity embodied in St. Patrick, as he defeats sin and the devil embodied in the various monstrous forms, and we associate quite often the devil with the serpent.
There is a legend about St. Patrick and an exorcism that involves an innkeeper and a demon. St. Patrick was at an inn, and he tells the innkeeper that a demon is in her cellar and has been feeding off her dishonesty. He tells her that she must change her ways to get rid of that demon. Later, Patrick returns to the inn and finds that the innkeeper is now serving her guests generous portions of whiskey. He praises her and takes her to the cellar, where they find the demon withering away. The demon flees in a flash of flame, and Patrick decrees that people should drink whiskey on his feast day in memory of this. This is said to be the origin of drowning the shamrock on St. Patrick's Day.
Only in Irish Gothic can we bring demons and monsters into the tale of St. Patrick, which is normally quite a sanitized story, Chris. Do you agree?
100%.
I guess that's how we roll. Just to keep that theme going, St. Patrick was also believed to have raised the dead. So according to some 12th century writings, Patrick raised 33 people from the dead, including some who'd been deceased for many, many years. The life and acts of St. Patrick, translated from the original Latin, states, "For the blind and the lame, the deaf and the dumb, the palsied, the lunatic, the leprous, the epileptic, all who laboured under any disease, did he in the name of the Holy Trinity restore unto the power of their limbs and unto their entire health. And these good deeds which he daily practised, 33 dead men, some of whom had been dead many years buried, did this great reviver raise from the dead." And they say that not so much a party trick, much more than a party trick, but it was St. Patrick's way of these revenants, these people he was raising from the dead. He got them to recount all the horrors of hell, the burning lakes, the torments, the demons, the worm that never sleeps. And he would use these reanimated people to convince other non-believers of the terrible fate that was waiting for them deep down in hell.
We talked about this before, but he was using fear to bring people to Christianity. He was trying to scare them out of the old ways. saying, oh, there's all this stuff waiting on you and you'll go to hell unless you do what I say. There's plenty of these stories. There's one called The Black Pig and the Devil's Track. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that one, Spence.
I'm semi-familiar with it. Maybe I'll let you go on there.
Whilst on a pilgrimage, St. Patrick learned from a terrified local of a fearsome black pig which was lying waste to the crops and the scourge of the countryside. Recognising the creature as a demonic in nature, St. Patrick set out to find it, and sure enough, encountered the creature. The pig fled, and St. Patrick gave chase. The pig slipped on the wet mud, and Patrick stuck and shook the creature with his staff and recited the Lord's Prayer. He returned to the villagers, telling them that evil had been vanquished. From then on, the pig was never sighted again, and the harvests were plentiful. Farmers, animals no longer frightened the night. People were amazed, and of course, they turned to God.
I do believe, Chris, that the little bookend of that story is that some years later a farmer found a stone in a field, and on that stone there was an imprint of a human foot and a cloven hoof, and the locals believed that the hoof was the markings of the devil, and the foot imprint belonged to Patrick, who had dumped the old Nick himself, in the form of the black pig, into submission.
It's definitely interesting because when you look at exorcisms, I believe Jesus in the Bible did an exorcism and he took the demons out of people and put them into pigs. So one of the first exorcisms ever talked about in the Bible was Jesus taking a demon out of a man and putting it into pigs.
Goodness. So St. Patrick has clearly had a huge influence on not just Ireland, but the world. And as we mentioned earlier, his missionary work put him in direct conflict with pagan druids. His faith and dedication was said to have turned chieftains into monks, druids into priests, and it led to the acceptance of Christianity in Ireland.
Yes, Spence, in that regard, he is seen as a saviour by many, a bringer of light to the darkness of paganism. But to those pagans, past and present, with their own dearly held complex belief systems, Patrick naturally represented something entirely different. To those druids and pagans, St. Patrick was the bringer of darkness, not light, the instigator of destruction of their beliefs and culture. There is no greater exploration of this conflict than the legend of Ossian and St. Patrick in what has been called the Great Debate.
It truly is a great debate. I'm paraphrasing a little here from Lady Augusta Gregory's Ossian and St. Patrick from In Gods and Fighting Men, 1904. Okay, but from that, we asked the question, who was Ossian? Ossian was a revered warrior. He was the poet's son of the mythical. I'll give you a clue, Chris. He's tall, he churns up the Causeway, and sometimes dresses as a baby.
Oh no, it's not Big Finn McCool.
Finn McCool, son of Finn McCool. You can catch that on an earlier podcast of Irish Gothic. And similar to another tale, we talked about the tale of Nera from our Cave of Cats podcast. Ossian, son of Finn McCool, also made a trip to the other world. And at the behest of a fairy princess, Neve, she had fallen in love with his poetry. And there he lived with Neve and the rest of the Sidhe, hunting and dancing and feasting, sleeping and dreaming for many lifetimes. But just as with Nera in the Cave of Cats tale, in time Ossian longed for Ireland and his comrades. So Neve lent him her horse, and she warned him that he must not touch the ground back in the real world, or he would never return. So he came back to Ireland, and he was still a young man, and he set out to find his warrior companions, but found they were all dead, and that the pagan faith of Ireland had been displaced by Patrick's Christianity. And as he rode along despondently, he saw a group of farmers struggling to move a boulder. And so he decided to go to their aid. He reached down, he tossed a stone aside for him, but as he did, he fell from the horse and he touched the ground. And in that minute, his hero's body withered and twisted, as all the hundreds of years gone by suddenly seized upon him.
Oh yeah, I mean, happens to me all the time when I walk down the stairs. With those farmers, when they saw the young, strange hero shriveled before their eyes into a feeble old man, the farmers brought Ossian to the one person they thought could help him. Who do you think that was?
Yeah, it's got to be St. Patrick.
It certainly was. And Patrick welcomed the wizened old Ossian warmly and invited him in to convert him, of course, to the new faith.
And that's when this great debate then occurred between these two, I guess, opposing factions. So Patrick was urging Ossian to sing the Psalms and he could be restored. But Ossian replied that his strength was gone, not because of the lack of singing, it was the lack of companionship of his friends. And Patrick countered that the music was the music of heaven. It was better than anything Ossian had ever shared with any army on a hill. Well, then, Ossian, just you mentioning your dog earlier there, Chris, Ossian asked St. Patrick, will I see my hound in heaven, or any of my father's good hounds? You may want to cover your ears here, Chris, or cover Luna's ears. No, Patrick answered, animals have no immortal souls and do not go to God's house.
Oh dear, 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 dear. A lot of people won't like that.
Other saints are available,
Yeah.
I guess. He didn't think much of any god who would not abide the hound of heroes in their halls, you know. He then asked him where his father and where his comrades, would they be in heaven waiting for him? Patrick shook his head grimly, said that they were men who knew nothing of the Lord, that they glorified in battle, they glorified in blood, and for all the harm that they had done to others, in the darkness of their disbelief, they would also not be in heaven. So Ossian said, if they're not in heaven, where is my father? Where are my comrades? And St. Patrick, of course, said they were in hell. And that's where you will go to, Ossian, if you do not convert.
Patrick then told Ossian about the fiery lake, about the torments, about the demons, and about the worm that never dies. He keeps bringing these things back up. A terrible place to languish for all eternity. And Ossian must do all in his power to escape those fires. But Ossian didn't agree. He said to Patrick that no devil or demon could keep Finn McCool and the Fianna under the bonds. And as his sadness and spirits rose, Ossian demanded to know how any god could excel Finn McCool for goodness.
How could it be that God or his priests could be better men than Finn, the king of the Fianna, a generous man without crookedness? If there was a place above or below better than the heaven of God, it is there that Finn would go, and all that are with him of his people. You say that a generous man never goes to the hell of pain. There was not one among the Fianna that was not generous to all. Ask of God, Patrick, does he remember when the Fianna were alive, or has he seen east or west any man better than themselves in their fighting? They used not to be saying treachery. We never had the name of telling lies. By truth and the strength of our hands we came safe out of every battle. There never sat a priest in a church, though you think it sweet to be singing psalms, was better to his word than the Fianna, or more generous than Finn himself.
Stop your talk, you withered, witless old man. That was Patrick's reply to that. It is my king that made the heavens. It is he that gathers blossoms to the trees. It is he made the moon and sun and fields and the grass.
If it's true what you say, Ossian continued, that your God is so unfriendly that he does not offer hospitality to any but those who obey his rules, and would turn out great and good men like my father, then my father and my comrades are certainly in hell. But I tell you now, they have either overthrown the devil and are ruling there themselves, or they have escaped long since and they are elsewhere. And it is there, wherever they may be, that I am bound. I will go to no house where my father is not welcome.
And at that, Ossian of Fianna thanked Patrick for his benevolence and breathed his last and went to find his friends.
Wow. And that debate goes on, that argument of Ossian and St. Patrick, I think it really elegantly illustrates that clash of competing belief systems, Chris, doesn't it?
It most definitely does. I mean, you've got a scenario there where the old is justifying itself against the new, and the new sort of struggles to justify itself. Full stop.
I think, as with many things Irish Gothic, when you peel back the surface a bit, there's so much more to learn. And we've found that every step of the way. And with St. Patrick, there's so much more than, jaunty leprechaun hats and shillelaghs and shamrocks. Have you any final thoughts on St. Patrick?
Definitely. I mean, we could talk about, and we touched on it a little bit earlier on, but of course he died on the 17th of March, 461 AD, and legend said that he's buried outside Down Cathedral in Downpatrick. At the highest part of the cathedral lies the grave of St. Patrick. Have you ever been there, Spence? Have you seen the grave, the big rock?
I have actually been quite recently, Chris, and even though I was moaning about how hard to climb Slamish is. It's actually quite a steep hill up to the church as well.
It certainly
but
is.
It's a stunning place, a fantastic visitor centre as well. So much history.
Oh yeah,
there.
that's reasonably. I mean, it's reasonably new, and it's the one place in the world which really holds the most information about St. Patrick. If you want to know the information, that's the place to go, that visitor centre. So on his grave, it's a massive granite stone marker, and that was placed there on Cathedral Hill in the early 1900s to protect the grave from the many pilgrims, because they were coming along and chipping bits of the grave away and taking it with them, and scooping the earth up. So it was really eroding away that area, so they had to stop that. St. Patrick is honoured as one of the most influential figures in Irish history. And of course, his feast day, which is March 17th, is celebrated worldwide. And that includes Chicago, who turn their rivers green, Dublin, who has a St. Patrick's Day March, as does Belfast, and basically globally, where everyone lifts a pint to St. Patrick on the 17th of March. And I'm sure you do the same, Spence.
I do, Chris, and now I'll be able to show off and drop a few little tidbits of information about St. Patrick, which I think it's fair to say most people maybe don't know. So it's, and we're so lucky, Chris, to have these, as I say, a few miles from here, there's the mountain, there's Slemish, some miles in the other direction, there's where he's buried, there's the river we drove out. We're so lucky to have this as part of our landscape, but I'm sure, Chris, you'll be able to put up some photographs and things onto the show docs to let folks from further afield see what we're talking about.
Most definitely. We'll get some stuff up there. And also, Spence, after you've had a few Guinnesses, you can go out with your big staff and beat down the pagans, because seemingly he was the scourge of the pagans. That's pretty much St. Patrick. There's a few other stories, but if you need to find them, you can look in the show notes, and there's plenty of links in there that'll tell you the thousands of stories that may be true and might not be true. So that, Spence, was St. Patrick. So you can put down your green beer and box back up your shillelaghs, because next week we're back on the monster trail with the Kelpie. And just give me a brief what the Kelpie is again, Spence.
One of those very fearsome, enigmatic creatures, Chris. It's a shape-shifting python, I guess some might say, that sort of stalks the shores of lonely lakes and lochs and rivers, looking for the unwary to pull into the depths.
Oh, I think you've said enough. You've said enough. You've set me up for next week. So make sure you tune in next week to hear more about that shape-shifting monster. But until then, good night, folks.
Bye, folks.
Looks like your story has found you. I wish it were another. But what's meant for you won't go by you. I'm sorry. No. No need to look so scared, eh? Enjoy the fire. Have a sup. Sure. Isn't it all just Irish Gothic? All just Irish Gothic.
You can find us at Irish Gothic Pod on Instagram or X. Or if you want to support us, please buy us a coffee.
And look, while you're there, give us a follow to keep up with all things in the Irish Gothic podcast. Send us any Irish myths, legends, stories that you'd like us to delve into next.
The Irish Gothic podcast was brought to you by Causeway Pictures. It's hosted by Chris Patterson and Spence Wright, and was produced by Rebecca Alcorn. All rights reserved. Check out our other podcast, Hostage to the Devil, which delves into the dark world of possession and exorcism. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts.